Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Adamson from Gunnison Valley PD in Utah, 25 years in law enforcement. He's a 29-year military veteran, currently serving as Deputy Commander of the 300th Military Intelligence Brigade, and he has a master's degree in public administration. Welcome to the show, Chief Adamson. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paige. I really appreciate it.
Of course. I'm really looking forward to it. I was kind of going through your bio and I wanted to ask you, being in law enforcement and a military veteran, what differences or similarities have you seen in the wellness space between law enforcement and the military?
Well, so I think there are a lot of similarities between military and law enforcement. A lot of it just stems to the type of work that you do. I mean, in
Mhm.
the military, um, you form, really great bonds with people, and a lot of that's we call it trauma bonding, right?
Mm.
You trauma bond with people, especially when you go into a combat zone. But in the military, you usually only go to combat zones every once in a while. I've only been deployed one time to Afghanistan, but you really bond with those individuals that you're in there. Like we always call it, like it's like being in the suck, and it's like that's the stuff you remember. Those are the things that you remember, those trauma things that you're involved in. So the same thing as a military personnel, like trauma events, they're either going to break you or they're going to bond you with the people that you work with. And
Mm.
I think that's a lot of those similarities. But then when it comes to like wellness, the difference with the military versus law enforcement, and this is going to vary from state to state, but
Sure.
like just taking like Utah, for example, like there is not a state program that's available for us. I mean, they might have some resources that we can reach out to if we had like a critical event and they'll come down and do a debrief with us, and offer some resources, but most of it has to be internal. Whereas like with the military, they have, deep pockets. They have, individuals that are assigned. We have like even at my brigade, we have a mental health, behavioral health science, doctor that is their therapist who works and does that full time, that can work with it. We have chaplains that are embedded within our units as well. They get down to the individual soldier, and then we do resiliency type training and programs and stuff like that on a regular basis. But a lot of times in the military, some of those things can really feel like check the box. And so I
Mm.
think it's really important, and I think this is kind of comes back to that trauma bond you get with certain people, is that having those people that you're close with. I think both in the military and in law enforcement that I've found that I can bounce stuff off of somebody that I can be really open, and have good, candid conversations with, and somebody who I know who's been there, right? I mean, that's where it's that's where I think that what that bond comes from, is because you're dealing with people who have been there, who have dealt with trauma themselves. And in law enforcement, I mean, unfortunately, we see it day in and day out. The normal, I think I was watching another, like an interview with somebody who was talking about like the normal citizen will have like 2 to 4, maybe 20 in an extreme trauma incidents in their entire lives. But whereas a police officer is going to have 4 to 500 in a 20-year period. And we're talking severe trauma, so it's like you got to think about like you as a regular citizen, how you deal with that trauma, and then how is that, for a law enforcement officer who's seeing it day in and day out. I mean, and they can really just shut down and not talk to the people that are around them, and there's not that understanding. But I mean, I think that's usually the biggest thing between the two of them, but the similarities are extremely great.
Thank you. Yeah, there are a few things that you said that I kind of want to circle back to because I have heard this before in the context of, in law enforcement, like you said, it's day in and day out. It's every single day that you're on a shift that you're going to be experiencing varying levels of stress and trauma. Whereas in the military, you have more maybe of that time off to decompress. It's maybe not an everyday thing for 20 years. And
Yes.
so we've talked a lot about the importance of decompression, the importance of having that time off. I also really appreciate that you talked about this idea of like, how can you bond together as a team to support each other? And I've had different opinions on this, but do you think that wellness as a whole is less stigmatized in military versus law enforcement?
I've definitely seen. I mean, because well, I've seen a change in both places. through my career. Because I mean, I started both my law enforcement and my military career at the the end of the '90s.
Mhm.
Um, this December will be my 30th year. I'll finish my 30th year in the military, and then but I started in '99 and in law enforcement. And back then it was more. I felt like it was much more of a stigma. It was like kind of like I grew up with a grandfather who served in World War II, and it was just like, hey, you tough it up.
Yeah.
He was an infantry guy, served in northern Italy, did the whole push through till the end of the war there as an infantry guy. And I mean, I idolized my grandfather. Like he was a man's man. I mean, he'd been shot. He won a Purple Heart and got a Bronze Star and all these great things. Um, and so I mean, like that. I think that my generation, we grew up with grandparents who were like that. Our parents had been served in the military or had served in Vietnam or other conflicts, and so a lot of us that have families that have served, we tend to go towards the service type job. Like my oldest son, he's in the police academy right now to become a police officer. I mean, it's like a family thing. My brother and my father both served. My grandfather served in the military, and my wife, like all of her family, has served in the military. So we have long histories of that. I think when my career first started in both areas, there was more of a stigma. It was like, hey, you don't go and do that. You just need to tough it out. I mean,
Yeah.
that's your job. But then I have seen, and I think in a very positive way, in both areas that, hey, there's a lot of people that struggle. You go down range in the military and you see some of the most horrible things. I mean, and I always try to explain to people like the way for me to describe like what a combat zone was and what we were doing there because we had totally different rules of engagement, but we just commenced what I called the work of death. Like we would go and we were trying to destroy or kill the enemy to stop them from doing things. And so that is such a different mindset than living in America for the most part, where you are safe. Like you have freedoms to say and do whatever you want, and you don't have worries for the most part if somebody's out to kill you or blow up your house or you know those kind of things. So I mean, it's just such a different environment, and I think we've made some very positive changes towards that, and I've seen that for sure at my last agency where I retired from before I transitioned into this chief position. um, you know, we mostly just handled it, at the squad level, like on patrol with the patrol sergeant. We would have debriefings and stuff. But then it became more of like our whole organization, our agency was involved with it. They brought in people who would share their experiences and the struggles that they had from, the calls that they had gone on. And a lot of times it's just kind of interesting. It's like the call that would trigger somebody it wasn't like some big trauma thing. It was the fact that they felt like they had failed on that call. And so
Mm.
that's what just like would beat them up inside. But it was good for us to be able to talk about it. And then the resources became available. And now I don't feel like there's much of a stigma at all. Like if one of my officers was going to get help and therapy, then absolutely good. That's what I want.
Yeah.
We have tons of resources that are available. We're a small agency, but we still have resources available. And I want you to go get them.
Yeah.
Go get that help.
I love that you mentioned the value of just talking about stuff. I think that, and I've experienced this in my life too, like I grew up in an environment where like you shoved it down and like you learned to survive and you kept going, or else like you couldn't get
Yeah.
through it if you didn't do that, and so I can see both sides of it. Like I know what it was like to feel embarrassed or feel shame about things that were, impacting you, or maybe reaching for unhealthy coping mechanisms as a way to, try to get through it. Like I know what that's like. Come out on the other end and understand how freeing it is to just talk about it and
Yeah.
to understand that other people are going through hard things too. And there's something to be said about that, to feel like you're not alone in all of the valleys, like I think in the peaks, I think it's not as, I mean, you know, you feel
Of
good
course.
in the peaks,
Yeah.
right? But in the valleys, it's like, okay, I'm not alone in this. Everyone has mud on their boots here, like we're all going through something. I think it's so valuable to be able to talk about it. I also love when you talked about like having what did you call it? The buddy, the suck buddy?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was
We're
it?
in this
You're in the
together.
suck together. Um,
Trauma bond.
trauma
Trauma bond.
bonding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was I said this the other day, and it's so funny that it's coming up. You have kids, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I've got a lot
Did
of kids.
did you I've got a lot of kids. Um, did you ever see the movie Finding Nemo?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know when they're like, "Do you have your exit buddy?" And they like all like buddy up and they're jumping out into the current. It's like kind of scary, right? They like don't know what to expect and they like kind of come together. Like that's what I think of. And it's like, how can you find that person within your life or within your organization where like that's your accountability buddy? That's the buddy that you're looking out for. They're looking out for you. How can you at least create a foundation where, like, from the beginning, and if you don't have it now, how can you maybe start it now, where no matter what, you don't feel like you're alone. You guys are looking out for each other. You got your, like, quote unquote, exit buddy together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's extremely important, right? I mean, and a lot of times you'll form those bonds with those people that you're closest to when you're like in the police academy
Mhm.
or when you're in the FTO or like your first, shift crew of people that you work with. I mean, my buddy that I went to the academy with and I went to my first agency together with, and we went from shift to shift together. I mean, I still talk to him on a pretty regular basis. I mean, we both have been doing this for, 20 20. I think we started here in Utah 24 years ago
Yeah.
together, and we still talk about, everything, all the stressors and stuff of the job. But so it's about building that. But if you don't have that, then you have to let somebody in. Like
Mhm.
that's what's most important. I mean, and that's one of the things that I think that has been really helpful for me is that, you know, I have a wife that will listen to me, and that has to be the person that I'm closest with. I can't hide things from it. I mean, and I remember when I first started, I just told her, I said, "Hey, look, I'm choosing this as our profession. Are you good with it?" And she was good with it, and I was like, I'm gonna have to tell you about some stuff that is awful. She doesn't want the gory details because she doesn't like that. But like if I had to see a child that passed away today, and she needs to know about that. She needs to understand that and be there for me and let me talk to her. And it's the same thing with your buddy because I mean like and a lot of times you'll think like, well, I only have the people that I work with because they've been there in that trauma. I was like, but if you push your family out, then then it's just gonna make it worse for you. You're gonna cause more problems for you than you really need. So you have to have somebody who's gonna be your partner, who's gonna listen to you, and build it. And if you don't, then go look for that person,
Yeah.
find that person, open up to somebody. Because I mean, unfortunately, both the military and in law enforcement, I have lost many of my friends to suicide, and it's heartbreaking. And some of those individuals, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, I saw where they were closed off here. This is where I should have engaged more with them, where I should have, reached out. You know what I mean? Of course, we all do that kind of stuff when we deal with some sort of a trauma or a loss. But it's, now's the time to do it. Like, don't wait till tomorrow. Sit
Yeah.
down and talk with those people. And if you have a buddy who's out there who you think, man, they really have been closing off lately, or they're struggling, or man, we had that really bad call and they just haven't been acting the same, then let's get with them. Let's make sure that they're doing the right thing. And like I'm not a therapist, and so like I can talk about it. We can discuss it. We can have similarity calls and stuff like that. But if they really are struggling with it, if they're losing sleep, then, I'm going to push them into like, or I'm going to suggest, or, I'm not going to shove them, but,
Right.
I'm going to suggest for them, like, hey, let's go talk to the therapist. Like, I think this is an important thing. Like, I think they probably can provide you with some good resources and some good mechanisms to help you cope with that.
I appreciate that you talked about both sides of it. One, how can you look out for other people in your circle and notice if there are signs or maybe behaviors that are abnormal? Like you said, closing off, or
Mhm.
maybe understanding that there was a difficult situation that maybe you're also struggling with, and you recognize that other people might be too. So, having that awareness around you, but then also as an individual being open to receiving the help and the feedback. And that's hard. It's hard for us to admit sometimes, that we need help. And I understand that. I still think that sometimes, you think that you're weak or whatever, but I had someone tell me that anytime someone comes up to you with feedback or suggestions, that it's an act of love. And I've tried to really recognize that. Like if someone's coming up to me and they're saying, "Hey, I'm noticing this," or "Hey, you're acting this way," of not being defensive, of being open to that, and then having those internal assessments of, am I struggling? Am I acting in this way? Are there things I should be doing that would help me through that? Maybe I stopped working out and I need to get back into that. Maybe I do need to go see a therapist or talk to someone about it. And so I think you have to be open and receptive to those things. And then we also have to be aware of the people around us. And one of the things that we've been talking about a lot is I want to kind of circle back to this idea of box checking, because you said this earlier that sometimes, you're seeing kind of that like, yep, we got it, check the box, and that's it. There's been this conversation recently about asking better questions, and how we all kind of have a default mode of like, hey, you good? Yep,
Yeah.
I'm good. Great,
Hmm.
cool. And then you like walk on, the rest of your day. And so, how can we ask better questions of like, and this is maybe not in the sense of like after an incident, but I started asking people instead of, hey, how are you? I'm asking, what is the best thing that happened to you today?
Yeah.
Because it encourages a response and for someone to think. So when we're asking people questions, can we ask a better question, a deeper question? And can we also make sure that we stick around to hear the response? Because so often it's always like kind of this like passing thing, which I also think is kind of a check the box. So what are some of the things that you're seeing as far as how maybe historically box checking has happened, or maybe how organizations are kind of checking the box, and what is the opposite of that? How do you encourage wellness that's deeper than that?
Yeah. So I think like for checking the boxes, a lot of that, I see that a lot more in the military because
Okay.
it's like we've got this training that we have to do. It has to be done at every drill or it has to be done once a month. And it is 100% like all of us go get in a classroom, somebody stands up and gives us a lesson on resiliency, whatever step of the resiliency, level we're on or whatever, and then it's sign the sheet so that way we can turn in and be like, look, we're doing our resiliency training. Oh, we're doing our suicide prevention training, and it very much feels like check the box. I had one of my soldiers who was just really good at just digging deep. So he would do those like simple questions like, hey, how you doing? And people would be like, I'm good. And then he would stop you and he'd put his hands on your shoulders and he'd be like, no, tell me how you're doing. How
Mhm.
are you? Like he'd be like, "How are you, Jason? Tell me, how are you?" And so then we would actually have a conversation, but you know, and not everybody's going to be able to do that. Not everybody's going to be able to get into somebody's, personal space like that, but it worked really well for him. And just, a wonderful soldier, just able to get in there and just you knew that they cared about you,
Mhm.
right? I mean, so that really was important. One of the other things that you had mentioned earlier was like, having people come up and giving you like good feedback and that. One of the things that I'm just going to grab it real quick. I set this on my desk because I stole this from my from when I was on a tactical team up in Salt Lake County.
It says
Um,
Honesty Cave for anyone who's
yep,
listening. It's
yeah.
a plaque that says Honesty Cave.
So I put this on my desk is because I want my officers to be able to come in and they can just give me honest feedback, and I'm not going to beat them up for it. I might take a
Mhm.
couple of deep breaths because I don't like what they're telling me, but usually if they're telling me something that I don't like, it's because it's probably true, right? And so you personally you have to have that emotional intelligence to be able to take that honest feedback, but also to dig in, with your people. And so I think really, I mean, I'm very fortunate. My department is small, right? I have, with my officers and my reserve officers combined, I'm like 12 people,
Mhm.
so it's easy for me to know what's going on in their lives. But if you're just an officer on a shift, then I would tell you dig in, find out about the people that you work with. Like, I mean, this is the person who's going to be rushing to your back when you're calling for backup because somebody's fighting with you or somebody's pulled a gun or whatever. So you want to make sure that they love you, and you need to love them. I think that's one of the most important things. And so, like, yeah, you may be in a department that's, you know, 1,500 or, you know, 5 or 10, like mine. But your group, your individual group, you gotta dig in, and you just got to get away from like. There's always going to be check the boxes, because like when something happens, we have to be able to pull out some sort of quantifiable data to say, look, we've done all the things we're supposed to. We did this training, we did that training. I have my officers doing this or I had them doing that. I was like, but if you really want it to work, you as the leader you have to dig in and you have
Yeah.
to get to know your people. And, you know, you have to understand your span of control too. I mean, like if I was a chief over a department of 200 people, yeah, I'd be able to learn all of their names, but I'm probably not going to know everything. But I would expect my leaders to call me and say, "Hey, Officer Smith just had a baby. Okay, well then I'm going to go and talk to them, or I'm going to go out and visit them at the hospital, or I'm going to, what I mean, I'm going to show up at their house, and so that they know that I care."
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I like that you said like loving the people that you're around. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're always gonna like certain people, but, like, do you care about them? Like, do you genuinely want what's best for them? Like, even if maybe you guys don't get along or maybe your personalities clash or whatever, like, do you actually love that person that's next to you? Would you be willing to have their back and know that they have yours too? And do you know anything about them, their kids' names, or, what they like to do? What are their interests? So I really like that you said dig deep a little bit, get to know each other, because ultimately you guys are a team,
Yeah,
and there's always going to be some like dysfunction. There's humans involved when it comes to team, but creating that environment of love and support with each other, I think is really important. So I'm glad you said that. I did want to talk a little bit about leadership, because you said like as a leader being able to do these things. And I agree with you. Honest feedback is tough. It's really
yeah,
tough, and you have like, I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to either take it personally and, like, be sensitive to that of, like, "Oh, man," like, because you want everyone to like you, I don't
of
I've come to
course,
terms with the fact that that's never ever gonna happen, but, like, I think we want to be liked, and we want, especially if you're doing your best, we want that to be recognized, but it's not always that way. But then I also think having, like you said, that, self-awareness and that emotional intelligence to at least ask the question, "Is what they're saying true?" Am I doing these things? Like, is this valid? Is it fair? And looking at it from a different perspective. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is like, how do you train that? How do you train emotional intelligence? How do you develop leaders within your organization? And so I guess my question for you is, in the context of leadership, what do you think makes a good leader, and how do you develop the future generations of leaders?
yeah. So I think the biggest things that come to mind with me with leadership is that, like, we've already talked about this a little bit, but do you care about your people?
Mm,
Like, and like you may care about them, but do they know it? Like if every time you have an interaction with them and they say something that you don't like and you tell them, you kind of blow up at them, well, they're going to stop coming to you with that stuff. And then you're going to be in this false sense of like, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything perfect. And then you have a humongous morale problem because you're unwilling. I mean, and
mm,
really, as a leader, you want your people to come in and talk to you, and so they have to feel like they have that ability to be honest with you, and without you kind of exploding. I mean,
mm,
and maybe you may disagree with them, and so have a good candid conversation back and forth about it. I was like, but you don't have to scream and yell at them. I think so. Initially, it's just about, do you love your people? Like, I mean, and I'm not saying like you're in love with them and you want to go and
right.
hang out with them all the time, but it's that general like, do I actually care about them? Do I have empathy for them? Do they know that I care about them? The other thing is that do you trust them? I mean, like we give our officers a gun and a badge, ability to arrest people. They drive around in a vehicle that has, $50,000 of equipment in it, and they can take somebody's life, in order to protect, and it's like, do I trust them? If I trust them to do that, then do I trust them to, make the right decisions? And do I have their back? Like if my officers don't feel like I'm going to protect them, if they're doing the right thing, then, then why would they even come to me with stuff? I always tell my officers like my three things, like, is it ethical? Is it moral? And is it legal? If it falls into those three categories, you're going to be fine. And I'm going to protect you and I'm going to come to your back. You just have to articulate to me as to what it is.
Yeah.
The other really important thing that leaders need to do is accountability. You have got to hold your people accountable. You give them clear expectations about what it is that you expect out of them, what the citizens of our city expect out of them, And then you have to hold them accountable to that. I can't tell you how many officers I saw lose their careers because we were unwilling to hold them accountable on the simple things. And
Mm,
so then all of a sudden now they've done something that they can't come back from. Like they've done something that's illegal. They've now broken the law. They're going to lose their certification and they're getting fired. But
yeah.
if we had held them accountable for the simple things, like the coming in late or the missed reports or, you know what I mean? Just like the silly, stupid things, then they're like, okay, well, they're watching. And I just want them to be a better officer and explain to them why you have to do it. And I mean, and I've disciplined a lot of officers in my career and in the military. And I always start out with at the very beginning is like, look, I don't want to be here as much as you don't want to be here. And this is a speed bump in your career and we will move beyond it. I
Mm,
was like, we're going to do some stuff that will correct it. And then I'm not holding it over your head. And you got to do that. I mean, one of the best books I read was called Everybody Matters. I forget the author's name, but it's a great book um, that just talks about like as a parent, it's like you look at your kids and you love your kids and you want your kids to grow up and become good adults, right? And if my kid messes up, yep, I'm going to discipline them. And it's easy to discipline your kids as a parent. For those of you out there that are parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's easy to discipline them. But then what do we want to give our kids? A second chance, a third
mm,
chance, a fourth chance, right? We're trying to build them up to something else. So we need to treat our employees, our officers, our soldiers that exact same way. Like, yeah, we're going to correct them. Man, they might get hit pretty hard. They might get some days off without pay or whatever, but it's all about when they come back. That's when the real work starts. And so that's when they really know that you care, is that you're bringing them in and you're not holding it over their head. Oh, well, you did this, officer so and so, so you're not getting the special assignment or you're not doing this. No, it's bring them in, put them underneath our wing, and say, hey, I know you've always wanted to be in narcotics, or I know you've always wanted to be in special victims. How do we move from today to get you there in 2 years? Or how do we
mhm,
move from today to get you there in 6 months? And then you work with them and you mentor them. And then they actually feel like, okay, yep, yeah, they weren't just talking. They actually do care about who I am. And then you've got to lead by example. I mean, I can't ask my officers to do some horrible crappy shift if I'm not willing to come out there and do it. So if the guys are getting stuck on some horrible shift and they're out there at 2 in the morning, and but they're out there for 48 hours or whatever, then you as a leader, you need to show up at the time that's not fun. Get up out of bed. It really sucks to get up at 2 in the morning, put on your uniform, and go out there, but make sure that they know that you care and that you understand. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, I mean, I look back on my career back in 2005. I didn't grow up with body cameras on.
right.
Now I wear a body camera, and I'm like, I've never done that before. I mean, so it's a different environment that we're in. So we need to make sure that they understand the scrutiny that they're dealing with that we probably never did as a leader when we were young as an officer in law enforcement.
Do you think that everything that you talked about is servant leadership, or what is your definition of what it means to be a servant leader?
I think the easiest definition for servant leadership is what is it to be a parent and a parent that cares? Like that's being a servant, right?
Mm,
Are you willing to do the same thing that you're asking them to do? Are you going to hold yourself to the same accountability that you're going to hold them to? Are you going to are you willing to, like if I ask my officers, hey, I really would like you to get, at least one or two traffic stops a shift. Well, then maybe I should go out there and do a couple of them. They hear me on the radio, 6Q1's doing a traffic stop. They're like, oh man, he wants me to do that. He's doing it. I can do it. Right. It's not too
mhm,
hard for them to do that. Or if I want you to make a contact, well, if I hear the chief out there doing it or the sergeant, I mean, it depends. I mean, a much larger organization, a chief of 600 officers probably isn't going to be out doing any sort of, they're going to be going to meetings all day long for the most part. Um, but it just, for servant leadership, it's about caring. I mean, it really just boils down to that. Like, do you care about your people? Are you willing to put forth the effort to mentor them, to build them up, to make them, because one day I'm not going to be here. So
yeah.
I need to make sure I'm mentoring somebody who's going to take over from me. I mean, that's one of the things I think the military does a really good job about. You see it really well illustrated in We Were Soldiers when like Mel Gibson comes up to him when they're getting off the helicopter and he hits the sergeant. He's like, "You're dead." what do you do? And the corporal panics. And he's like, you're dead. What do we do? And then the like, get off the helicopter. And they all jump off, you know? I mean, but you have to train the people to be able to take over and step into your shoes. Like if you walk around your department saying, well, I don't know what they're going to do when I'm gone, you are 100% failing as a leader
Mm,
because you are not setting them up. Because as a police officer, we have a bullseye on our back and we could be taken out at any time. You know, I mean, it's the profession that we've chosen. So you've got to be training people and mentoring them and, you know, making sure they know that you care.
yeah. Wow. The one thing I really appreciate about this conversation is you gave specific examples of how you're doing this, and it's not this like generalized conversation. It's like, hey, like if I'm going to ask them to do XYZ, am I also willing to do XYZ? If if they come in late, I'm going to hold them accountable. If they do
Yeah.
this, I'm going to home, it's like these little things. So I really appreciate that actionable conversation that we've had, because I think sometimes it's like, okay, well, what do you mean? So it was very clear to me what you meant. And I really appreciate this idea of how do you lift people up? How do you prepare them for the future? How do you create more resiliency? How do you create more morale and value within the organization? Because I'll tell you right now, and everyone I think can relate to this. If I had someone who I was working with who was in leadership who did all of those things. And I knew it was from a space of love. And they said, hey, I want to get you to where you want to go. And I want you to be the best version of yourself. And I want to build you up because I care. I'm going to stay there a lot longer.
Oh
And so
yeah.
I think that also has to contribute to retention. I feel valued and I have a leader who's like really holding my hand. I would say that in like quotes, but like,
Mhm. Yeah.
leading the way so that I'm better. I want to work there. And we
Yeah.
know that retention is, a hard thing right now. And so how do you build that culture where everyone knows that they're being developed for the future?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is that you've got to do it. It's leadership by action, right?
Yeah.
You have to be the one that's willing to put forth. And I mean, it's so funny. There's always this debate about like when we get close to the budget cycle about like, well, we need to really give everybody raises because that's what they're leaving for. Well, when you do surveys on people when they're doing exit surveys, like in the military and in other organizations, like pay is like number 7 as the
Mm,
reason for why they're leaving. I
wow.
mean, now there could be a reason, like, you know, like if some agency is making $10 or $12 an hour more than your agency, yeah, you probably need to look at your pay issues. I was like, but the vast majority of it is because they're not being taken care of. Like they don't feel like they're valued there. And so it's that's what it's all about. And there's a great like I think it's a TED talk done by Simon Sinek. He's another one of these, you know,
Yeah.
leadership gurus. But he talks about this scene with this, you know, this soldier. I think he was a captain. They were fighting in Afghanistan. One of the soldiers had a GoPro on at the time. They were in a big, you know, what they call like, you know, troops in contact, a tick, and they were, you know, shooting it out with the enemy. They had a bunch of wounded. The medevac was coming in, and the captain was helping them put the soldiers into the helicopter. And as he was bringing the soldiers in, he was bending over and he was kissing his soldiers and saying something in their ears, just telling them like, "You're going to make it. You're going to be okay." I mean, and he talked about, he's like, well, how does the military create leaders that do that? And I
Mm,
think you see a lot of that in law enforcement as well, like leaders that really care about their people. And then like the corporate world where they're just like, we're about eating our own to, you know, how do I do this to go up the ladder? So I mean, I think it's all about leadership and action, about how do you show them that they matter, right? That you care about them and that, you know, you're striving to be the best that you can be so that they can be the best that they can be.
yeah.
And I loved, you know, like I couldn't tell you like how much I loved when I was a sergeant on the road working with a team of guys. I mean, and it was like I felt like a proud papa when my guys who had like a goal of like I had one guy who just wanted to be on the gang unit so bad, and he was just like that was all he wanted to do, and he was going out of his area to go work with them and go help them, but he needed to stay in his area. So it was like, how do I rein him in, but then also help him succeed?
Mm,
And I can't tell you how proud I was when he got on the radio and he was like, I can't remember what their call signs were, but
mhm.
when he was one of the gang guys, like it was fantastic to be able to see that and witness it, because instead of ruining his career, which you could, because it's like, hey, you're out of your area, I'm going to discipline you. You're not taking care of your area partners. Instead, I just brought him in and kind of mentored him and showed him, the air, but not in a negative way, in a positive way. And then helping them succeed and get to the assignments that they're really after. Anyway, that's the most fun, I think, in
Yeah.
in leadership.
Well, I think too, I want to just remind everyone that everything that we've talked about, in my opinion, that's wellness.
Yeah,
It's
agree.
personal development, professional development, mentorship, all of the things that you just talked about, that's wellness. Like that keeps people in the career longer, that keeps them motivated, happier, healthier, the organization is happier, healthier. And so everything that you just talked about, yeah, we're talking about leadership, but it's wellness. How do you support your people to where like now like he's in the gang unit and he's like so happy and
Yeah,
thriving, like I think that sometimes when we think about wellness, we've almost like um restricted ourselves to, and what it actually means to be well and what are those things that can get you there. And I think of course we have like the key pillars that everyone talks about: the physical, the mental,
mhm,
nutritional, financial, spiritual, all these things. But mentorship, professional advancement. There's a lot more to the conversation of wellness that I think that we haven't really maybe even scratched the surface yet. So I appreciate you putting that into perspective because it's like that is wellness. And I've heard a lot of people talk about how sometimes organizational stress is more stressful than what they're experiencing out on the streets. And so by creating that environment that you just talked about, you're helping to in a way like control the controllable but create a healthy environment within the organization. um, my final question for you is for the younger generation. We know that they are going to be tomorrow's leaders. In the context of wellness, what would you say to them? What words of wisdom could you give to them that maybe you learned along the way or maybe you wish you would have known when you were younger?
yeah, no, you're perfectly fine. So for me, the thing that I would tell them is that likely every single one of them, especially if they're new in this, already has a spouse or a significant other or a partner that maybe doesn't even work in this career field. Um, but that's the one person that is going to follow them their entire career.
Mm,
Right. And so what they need to do is they need to not box them out. That's so hard and it's so easy to do. Like it's so hard for them because then they're just doing it by themselves. But it's easy to do because it's like, well, they don't understand it, or I don't want them to deal with the trauma that I'm dealing with. I don't want them to see what I see or hear about what I'm doing or dealing with. Like, I mean, now just having body camera just as an example. I mean, we got into a little bit of a tussle the other day, and I showed my wife the body camera footage, and she just was like, "Oh, she didn't like it." She's like, "I didn't like
mm,
what you were doing, and this is happening." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's fun to me." I was like, "But um, what I mean by like you need to have that person be your partner is that you've got to have somebody that you can talk to, and you can't box them out. Like you've got to talk to them about what you're going through." Like
mm,
when I would go on calls and it would be like, horrible suicide of a young child or a young kid or something like that, I would go home and I'd hug my kids. My kids didn't know exactly why I'm hugging them, but very, very, um, good for me and just a great way for me to cope with it. But then, I'd go and talk to my wife about it. So she was understanding what I was doing. Like, I didn't give her the details of what I saw or what I did there, but I would explain to her what I was dealing with. And then she was there for me and we could talk about it. And if I needed to talk in more detail, she was there for me to do that. So you have to find your significant other and that one person that you're able to go and they end up being your partner through your career and through your life, because when your career is done, really all that you have left is your family. And I remember one time one of my buddies was on the SWAT team with me, and we were talking. He's like, how come you didn't come to this party? I was like, well, I had a family event. And I was like, and besides, most of you aren't coming to my funeral. My family will. I was like, so that's where my focus is going to be on is my family. Because they're the ones who I will have throughout my life. And I want my kids to love me. I want them to bring their grandkids around because I'm super excited. I'm gonna have two grandbabies this year, and it's like the greatest thing ever.
Oh,
I'm
I
so
love
excited.
that. I
Yeah, I
love
keep telling my daughter, I'm like, you take care of my best friend. I was like, take care of my best friend.
that. I
So
love that.
anyway, yeah, but that's what I would just suggest is that you find that person that you can share this experience with, because it is an experience and it's fun and it's exciting, and it's sad and it's traumatizing. I was like, but if you box them out, then you're going to be dealing with the trauma, then you're going to be dealing with issues at home, and you're going to end up getting separated. Which I mean, law enforcement, military, there's so many people that the rates of divorce are so high. Don't be that statistic. Be the one that makes it.
Yeah. Well, and anyone who's listening who doesn't know, you've been married for 29 years. And so you have solid advice. I would listen to him, everyone. I'm gonna have to talk to him offline about the secret sauce of that. So thank you, Chief Adamson. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Paige, for having me.
Of course.